Chapter 1: The Beginning of Dreams. It was the first day of engineering college. A sea of eager students flooded the campus, their eyes shining with the hope of a bright future. Among them was James, a shy and introverted boy who had always been more comfortable with books than people. His parents had worked hard to send him to one of the best engineering colleges in the city, and he was determined not to let them down. On the other side of the college lawn, surrounded by her friends, was Camila, bright, beautiful, and full of life. Her laughter echoed through the corridors, turning heads wherever she went. She had a magnetic charm that drew people toward her effortlessly. Everyone knew Camila, and her bubbly personality made her the center of attention. Then there was William, a confident and athletic young man who was the epitome of cool. With his swagger and wit, William was the type of guy who could win over anyone with just a smile. He and Camila had been together for a year by the time they entered college. They were the perfect couple, admired by everyone for their love story. But among the crowd, there was one person who couldn't take his eyes off Camila: James. From the moment he saw her, his heart felt something it had never felt before. It wasn't just her beauty, but the way she radiated happiness, how her presence seemed to light up the world around her. And yet, he knew that a girl like her could never notice someone like him. James quickly found himself becoming friends with both Camila and William, despite his initial hesitation. Engineering was tough, but the three of them shared a bond that made it easier. They studied together, hung out after classes, and soon, they were inseparable. James tried to keep his growing feelings for Camila hidden, knowing how deeply she loved William. But the more time he spent with her, the harder it became to bury his emotions. Chapter 2: The Silent Love. As months passed, James's friendship with Camila deepened. She began to rely on him for everything: homework help, late-night conversations, and emotional support whenever she had a fight with William. James was always there, always listening, always ready to catch her when she fell. He became her shoulder to cry on, and in those moments, when her tears soaked into his shirt, he allowed himself to dream. In Camila's eyes, James was a kind friend, someone she could trust implicitly. She never noticed the longing in his gaze, the way his breath caught every time she smiled at him. To her, James was her best friend, nothing more, nothing less. She couldn't see how his world revolved around her. William, on the other hand, was busy with his sports commitments and his own group of friends. While he loved Camila, he often took her for granted, assuming she would always be there for him. He had a carefree attitude, believing that their love would survive any obstacle. But the truth was, it was James who filled the gaps in Camila's life when William wasn't around. James, in his silent suffering, did everything for her. He would buy her favorite coffee before class, fix her bike when it broke down, and wait patiently for hours when she was late. Every gesture, every act of kindness, was his way of showing his love. But Camila never suspected that James's heart belonged to her. She thought all of it was William's doing, her boyfriend, her hero. One rainy evening, after a particularly bad fight with William, Camila came running to James, her eyes swollen from crying. "He doesn't understand me, James. He doesn't care like you do," she sobbed, resting her head on his shoulder. James's heart shattered into a million pieces, but he didn't say a word. He held her tightly, wishing he could take away her pain, even if it meant enduring his own heartache in silence. Chapter 3: The Cracks in the Relationship. The more Camila leaned on James, the more distant she and William became. Their once perfect relationship was now strained, filled with misunderstandings and unspoken resentment. William, caught up in his world, couldn't see how much Camila was hurting, nor did he realize how much she had begun to rely on James. James, meanwhile, was trapped in a web of his own making. He loved Camila with every fiber of his being, but he knew he could never tell her the truth. How could he? She was in love with William, and he was just the friend who stood in the shadows, watching as his own heart slowly crumbled. One evening, after a particularly brutal argument, William stormed out of the apartment he shared with Camilla. Furious and heartbroken, Camilla called James, and without hesitation, he rushed to her side. They spent the night talking, laughing, and sharing memories. For the first time in a long time, Camilla felt at peace. As the night drew on, she fell asleep on James's shoulder, and in that quiet moment, James allowed himself to hope, just for a second, that maybe, just maybe, she would see him differently. But the next morning, as the sun streamed through the window, reality hit him hard. Camilla woke up, checked her phone, and saw dozens of missed calls and messages from William. Her face lit up, and James's heart sank. She was still in love with William. She always would be. Chapter 4: The Unseen Sacrifice. One fateful day, disaster struck. The three of them had planned a weekend trip to a nearby hill station. It was supposed to be a getaway, a chance to relax and forget about all the tension. James knew that Camilla was hoping to mend things with William, and though it pained him, he agreed to go along, hoping that at least he could spend some more time with her before she returned fully to William's arms. The trip was beautiful at first. The air was crisp, and the mountains were a refreshing change from the hectic city life. But on the second day, while they were driving up a steep mountain road, a terrible accident happened. The car skidded on a sharp turn, and before anyone could react, they were tumbling down a steep incline. Everything happened in a blur. The car was upside down, and smoke filled the air. William had been driving and was unconscious. Camilla was trapped in the back seat, screaming for help. James, though injured, managed to crawl out and immediately went to rescue her. The car was teetering dangerously on the edge of a cliff. If it fell, both Camilla and William would be gone. James could feel his strength waning, but he couldn't let that stop him. He reached inside the car, pulling at the door with all his might. "James, please, help us!" Camilla cried, her face covered in blood and tears. With a final burst of energy, James managed to open the door. He grabbed Camilla's hand and pulled her out just as the car started sliding further. But William was still inside. Without thinking, James dove back into the wreckage, determined to save his friend. As he dragged William out, the ground beneath the car gave way. The car tumbled down the cliff, and James, weakened by his injuries, couldn't hold on any longer. In that last moment, he looked at Camilla, her face etched with horror, and smiled. "I love you," he whispered softly, too low for her to hear. And then he let go. Chapter 5: The Song of Loss. The days following the accident were a blur for Camilla. She had lost her best friend. James's death left a gaping hole in her heart, one she didn't know how to fill. As she sat in her hospital bed, recovering from her injuries, the weight of James's sacrifice finally hit her. He had given everything for her. Every time she had been sad, every moment she had needed someone, James had been there. And in the end, he had given his life to save her and William. She realized too late that James had loved her, that all the things she had thought William had done for her were actually James's silent gestures of love. William, too, was shaken. He had survived because of James's bravery, and the guilt of it weighed heavily on him. He knew he had taken Camilla for granted, and in the end, it had been James who had been the true hero. At the funeral, Camilla couldn't stop the tears from falling. She clutched James's favorite book in her hands, the one he had always carried with him. It was worn, with notes scribbled in the margins, and on the last page, she found a letter addressed to her. "I never had the courage to tell you how I felt. I knew you loved William, and that was enough for me. But I want you to know that every moment I spent with you was the happiest of my life. You gave me a reason to smile when the world felt empty. I hope, in the end, I was able to give you something in return. Thank you for being my friend." Camilla's heart broke as she read his words. She had lost the one person who had loved her more than anyone else, and she hadn't even known. Epilogue, a love unspoken. Months passed, but the pain of James's loss never left Camilla. She visited his grave often, sitting in silence, thinking about all the things she wished she could say to him. William and Camilla eventually parted ways, their relationship unable to withstand the weight of James's sacrifice. But Camilla would never forget James. His love, though unspoken, had been the purest she had ever known. And in the quiet moments of her life, she could still feel his presence, like a soft whisper in the wind, reminding her that love doesn't always need words, it lives on in the heart. And so, James's love became a song that would forever echo in Camilla's soul, a melody of friendship, sacrifice, and a love that transcended time.